In Louisiana, there is a prison spread across roughly 18,000 acres of former plantation land, an area close to the size of Manhattan. But unlike Manhattan, there are no crowded blocks, towers, subway lines, or neighborhoods packed against its edge. There are fields, trees, swampy ground, long empty roads, and beyond all of it, the Mississippi River. To reach this place, you drive through rural West Feliciana Parish until the road stops at a gate. There is no busy city waiting on the other side, no suburbs creeping toward the fence, just a prison sitting deep inside a bend of the river, far from the Louisiana most people know. This is Louisiana State Penitentiary, known almost everywhere as Angola. It is one of the country's largest maximum security prisons. At first, its location makes little sense. A prison this large needs workers, supplies, doctors, repairs, court trips, buses, and constant deliveries. Why build it so far from a major city? Why put an institution this huge in a place where the land itself seems to push the rest of the world away? The answer is not one decision made by prison planners. It begins with the land that was here first. Follow the river far enough, and it starts to fold back on itself, a wide curve, then another. The water doubles back until it has nearly closed a circle around thousands of open land. This is where Angola sits. There is one road in. Follow it east, and eventually the trees thin, fields spread out, and rural towns appear along the highway. Follow it west, toward the river, and the opposite happens. Fewer buildings, fewer turns, the road simply continues until it stops at a gate. That doesn't mean Angola is cut off from the world. People still drive in and out every day. Staff, deliveries, lawyers, families making the trip to visit. But before any of them reach a gate or a fence, the land has already done something on its own. It has made the distance real. That is not an accident of geography. It's a shape that happens to fit a very particular kind of institution, and this land held that shape long before Angola. Because someone else recognized what this bend in the river could do more than a century before the first cell block was built. Strip away the fences, the towers, the modern roads, and the outline underneath barely changes. This same bend in the river, this same reach of fertile ground, belonged to a plantation long before it belonged to a prison. The original Angola plantation was tied to Isaac Franklin, a man who built his fortune trafficking and enslaving human beings. The fields stretching out from that river bend were worked by enslaved people under a system that used violence and forced labor to hold everything in place. The name carries that history. It's widely understood to trace back to the African homeland of people forced to labor here. The plantation changed hands. Slavery ended. Convict leasing came and went. A state prison rose on the same ground. The name never left. That continuity is the first sign that this land was never a blank space waiting for a prison to arrive. It already had a use, a deep enough river for shipping, soil rich enough for large-scale crops, and a rural, hard-to-reach setting that made it easier for an owner to control who came, who left, and who saw what happened in between. The river didn't create slavery. The hills didn't create slavery. Geography never excuses what happened on this land, but geography helps explain why a plantation this large, this brutal, and this isolated could exist here, and why when the era of plantations ended, the next system to arrive would want the very same ground. The Civil War ended slavery. It did not end forced labor on this land. For decades afterward, Louisiana ran what was called convict leasing. The state handed control of incarcerated people to private operators who put them to work, on farms, on railroads, on the levees holding back the same river that shaped this landscape. For the state, leasing cut costs. For the operators, it meant cheap labor. For the people forced into it, the record shows abuse, neglect, and conditions that were often deadly. Angola was already part of that system before Louisiana ever owned it outright. By the late 1800s, prisoners were being held and worked on the plantation grounds under private lease, the land moving from one form of forced labor directly into another. So the story isn't plantation, then prison. There's a step in between, one where the institution changed and the paperwork changed, but the basic use of the land did not. Louisiana's 1998 Constitution finally ended convict leasing. When the last lease expired, the state took direct control of Angola in 1901. For the first time, Louisiana needed to run a prison on this land itself, and Angola offered exactly what the state needed to start. Thousands of acres already cleared for farming, work areas and living quarters already standing, river access already in place, and a location far enough from any city that oversight and interference could both be kept at a distance. The owner changed, the institution changed, the land's usefulness did not. The Angola that Louisiana took over in 1901 was not the vast landscape seen today. It started here, roughly 8,000 acres, the footprint of the old plantation lease. Then it started to grow. Farming beside a river this size is a trade-off. The same water that enriches the soil can just as easily ruin it. When floods damaged neighboring farms or made them too costly to keep working, those properties didn't always find another buyer. Angola did. Piece by piece, decade by decade, the state folded more of the surrounding land into the prison. What began as roughly 8,000 acres became roughly 18,000, about 28 square miles, a footprint close to the size of Manhattan. But where Manhattan is packed edge to edge with towers and streets, this space is divided differently between fields, internal roads, housing units, work areas, and long stretches of land that exist mainly to create distance. That much connected land would be almost impossible to assemble near a city. Out here, nothing stopped the boundary from moving outward again and again. Remoteness didn't just protect Angola from the outside world, it gave Angola room to keep becoming something larger. Picture a prison, and most people imagine one building, a wall, a gate. Angola breaks that image before you're halfway across the property. There isn't one prison here, there are multiple housing units and facilities spread across the land, connected by internal roads that sometimes run for miles between them. Drive from one part of Angola to another, and you'll pass open fields long before you reach the next cluster of buildings. Medical care, maintenance crews, farm operations, religious programs, internal transportation, all of it has to exist inside the property because there is no city block to lean on nearby. The isolation even shaped Angola's own media. The Angolite, written and edited by incarcerated people, has documented life inside the prison for decades. Radio and television operations have existed here too, infrastructure most prisons would never need to build for themselves. A prison near a major city can borrow what it needs: hospitals, supply routes, a large outside workforce a short drive away. Angola doesn't have that option nearby. Every mile of distance from the outside world becomes a mile of infrastructure it has to build within its own boundary instead. The farther a place sits from everything else, the more it has to become everything else on its own. Of everything that changed on this land, one thing didn't. The farming never stopped. Angola's fields are still worked today as part of prison labor programs, incarcerated people cultivating the same broad stretch of ground that has been farmed in one form or another for close to 2 centuries. A plantation and a state prison are not the same institution. They exist under different laws, different eras, different systems entirely. That distinction matters, and it shouldn't be flattened. But the thread connecting them runs directly through this soil. Enslaved labor, convict leasing, prison labor. 3 different systems, 3 different sets of laws, and one continuous line of people made to work this same land under conditions they did not choose. That's what makes this more than a footnote in the story of Angola's location. It's part of the answer itself. This wasn't random land handed to a prison. It was land already organized, long before Angola existed, around the idea of keeping a workforce confined, watched, and working. What do you think matters more in Angola's location? The natural barriers, the farmland, or the history already attached to it? The final pieces explain why this stretch of riverfront land has never turned into something else. Riverfront land like this usually doesn't stay empty for long. Developers see homes, resorts, marinas, new roads leading to new neighborhoods. Here, none of that happened. The Mississippi gave this land fertile soil, one of the reasons it became valuable in the first place. But the same river brought floods, isolation, and a level of access that never matched what developers look for. And then, Louisiana placed one of the country's largest prisons directly on top of it. A maximum security prison doesn't invite the kind of growth a city sees. It needs separation, not subdivision. Controlled roads, not new ones. Land that stays whole, not land sold off in smaller and smaller pieces. So the land stayed open, not because it was worthless, it never was, but because something else was already using every acre of it. Angola wasn't built on land nobody wanted. It was built on land that had already proven for more than a century exactly what it was good for: farming, isolation, and control. The prison didn't just occupy that history, it made sure the land never had the chance to become anything else. So why does America's largest prison sit this far from everything? Because it was never, really, nowhere. Long before Angola became a prison, this land already had everything a plantation system wanted: fertile fields, river access, distance from towns, and room to control a large, forced workforce. After the Civil War, convict leasing carried that same use forward under a new name. In 1901, Louisiana took direct control, and Angola became a state prison built on ground that had already been organized for generations around confinement and labor. The riverband didn't create Angola. The hills didn't create Angola. The swamp didn't create Angola. But together, they helped create the kind of place where isolation, labor, and control could keep going, system after system, for more than 200 years. That's why Angola is still here, surrounded by fields, trees, water, and long roads that end at a gate. It wasn't placed on empty land by chance. It was built on land whose history had already made it useful for exactly this. When you look at Angola from above, you're not just looking at a prison in the middle of nowhere. You're looking at a place where geography and history locked together and never let go. If this investigation changed the way you see Angola, subscribe for more stories about the places history built and geography kept in place. This video uses historical and public information for education. It is not a complete or official account of every event discussed.